Once upon a time, in a small coastal village nestled between the cliffs and the sea, there lived a young girl named Mara. She had always been different from the other children. While they played in the fields and swam in the ocean, Mara spent her days gazing at the horizon, dreaming of the mysteries that lay beneath the waves. The villagers often told stories of hidden treasures at the bottom of the sea, guarded by ancient creatures. Most believed these tales were nothing more than old legends, but Mara believed there was truth in them. One day, Mara stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the endless sea. The horizon was a place of mystery, and her heart longed to know what lay beyond. While other children were content to play along the shore, she felt something calling her to explore the unknown depths. Her village, nestled between the cliffs and the ocean, was filled with legends of the sea, but Mara knew there was more truth to these stories than anyone believed. Her grandmother, Nana Lyra, was the only one who didn't laugh at Mara's wild dreams. She spoke in riddles, often hinting that the tales passed down through generations contained clues about ancient secrets buried deep beneath the waves. Mara felt a deep connection to these stories, as if they were meant for her and her alone. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Nana Lyra called her to the cottage. In her hands was something Mara had never seen before, a compass, its surface worn smooth from years of use. Nana Lyra pressed it into Mara's hands with a solemn expression. "This compass has been in our family for generations," Nana Lyra said, her voice soft and full of meaning. "It was given to me when I was about your age, and now it's time I pass it on to you." Mara's fingers curled around the cool metal, feeling a strange energy pulsing through it. The needle inside spun for a moment before pointing steadily to the west, toward the sea. Mara was in awe. "What does it point to?" she asked, her eyes wide. Nana Lyra smiled, her eyes twinkling with secrets. "It will guide you to where you need to go, but remember, child, the journey it leads you on will not be an easy one. You must be brave, for the path ahead is filled with trials." That night, Mara lay awake in bed, the compass resting on her nightstand. The gentle glow of the moon filtered through her window, casting shadows that danced across her room. She couldn't stop thinking about what Nana Lyra had said. What journey lay ahead of her? What secrets did the compass hold? The next morning, Mara stood at the shore, the compass clutched tightly in her hand. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden light on the water. She glanced back at her village, peaceful and unaware of the adventure she was about to embark on. Nana Lyra had warned her that the journey would be difficult, but Mara knew she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward the sea. With a deep breath, she stepped into her small wooden boat. The compass's needle pointed steadily to the horizon. As she rowed farther from shore, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull of her boat. Mara felt a sense of both excitement and fear, knowing she was heading into the unknown. Hours passed as she sailed, the shore shrinking behind her until it was nothing but a distant line. The sky darkened, clouds gathering on the horizon. The air became heavy, and Mara knew a storm was coming. But there was no turning back now. The compass urged her forward. He storm hit with a fury Mara had never experienced before. Waves crashed against her tiny boat, tossing it like a leaf in the wind. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking her to the bone. The compass remained steady in her hand, its needle unwavering even as the world around her seemed to crumble. Mara fought to keep the boat afloat, her arms burning from the effort of rowing against the powerful current. For hours, she battled the storm, her mind racing with thoughts of home. Had she made a mistake? Was this journey too dangerous? But then she remembered Nana Lyra's words. The journey would be filled with trials. She had to stay strong. The storm wouldn't last forever. Just as she felt her strength fading, the storm began to calm. The wind died down, and the waves receded. Mara, exhausted and soaked, collapsed in the boat, her body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. But as she lay there, she saw something extraordinary, a faint glow beneath the water. The glow was unlike anything Mara had ever seen. It pulsed softly, like the beating of a heart, casting an eerie light on the surface of the water. For a moment, Mara thought it might be her imagination, but as the glow grew brighter, she knew it was real. It seemed to beckon her, just like the compass had. With a deep breath, Mara gathered her strength and stood, peering over the edge of the boat. The water was calm now, and she could see something moving beneath the surface. Her heart raced as she realized this could be what the compass was leading her toward. Without hesitation, Mara dove into the water. The cold enveloped her instantly, but she swam down, following the light. The deeper she went, the brighter the glow became. Shapes began to form in the darkness, shimmering crystals lining the walls of an underwater cave. The walls of the cave sparkled with an ethereal light, casting shimmering reflections that danced across the water. Mara swam deeper into the cave, her heartbeat matching the rhythmic pulse of the glow. The farther she ventured, the more breathtaking the sight became. Stalactites of crystal hung from the ceiling, while the floor was covered in a bed of pearls and shining stones. But Mara wasn't here for treasure. She was here to find answers, and as she swam further into the cave, she saw it, a large, ancient chest sitting on a pedestal of rock. It was covered in barnacles, its wood weathered from centuries beneath the sea. She knew this was what she had been searching for. Just as she reached out to open it, a deep rumble echoed through the cave. Mara froze, her hand hovering over the chest. She turned slowly, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a massive creature. Its eyes glowed like embers in the dark water. The creature was unlike anything Mara had ever seen. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered like the crystals in the cave, and its large, glowing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. It moved slowly, circling the chest as if it were guarding it. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not here to steal," she whispered, though her voice was muffled by the water. "I've come to learn." The creature paused, its massive head tilting slightly as if it understood her. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence, and Mara felt an odd connection to it. There was something in its eyes, something old and wise, but also filled with sorrow. Slowly, the creature moved aside, allowing her to approach the chest. Mara hesitated for a moment before reaching out and lifting the heavy lid. Inside, instead of gold or jewels, she found a simple, weathered scroll. Mara unrolled the scroll carefully, her fingers trembling with anticipation. The parchment was old, its edges frayed and brittle, but the ink was still clear. It wasn't a treasure map as she had expected. It was something much more valuable. It was a map of the world, but not the world Mara knew. This map showed places that didn't exist on any map she had ever seen. There were islands and continents, mountains and valleys, all unknown to anyone but those who had drawn this ancient map. Mara's heart raced as she realized what she was holding. This wasn't just a treasure. It was a key to unlocking the mysteries of the world. As she studied the map, the compass in her hand began to glow, its needle pointing to one of the distant islands on the map. Mara knew that this was her next destination. The compass wasn't just guiding her to one treasure, it was leading her on a journey to discover the unknown. Mara tucked the scroll into her satchel and glanced at the creature, which still hovered nearby, watching her. It hadn't made any move to harm her, and she felt a strange sense of gratitude toward it. Whatever it was, it had allowed her to find the map, and in doing so, had set her on a path she could never have imagined. With one last look at the shimmering cave, Mara swam back toward the entrance. As she surfaced, the storm had completely passed, and the sea was calm. The sky was clear, and the moon hung low on the horizon, casting a silver glow on the water. Mara climbed back into her boat, the scroll safely tucked away, and set her course for home. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had only just begun her journey, but already it was more than she had ever dreamed. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She would need help, guidance, and courage for the challenges ahead. By the time Mara returned to the village, the sun was rising, casting the first rays of light across the land. She pulled her boat onto the shore, her body aching from the journey. The village was just beginning to wake, the smell of breakfast fires filling the air. But Mara couldn't think about food or rest. She had too much to tell. She hurried to Nana Lyra's cottage, her heart pounding with excitement. Nana was sitting outside, as if she had been waiting for Mara to return. When she saw the compass still clutched in Mara's hand, a smile crept across her weathered face. "You've found it, haven't you?" Nana asked, her voice filled with quiet pride. Mara nodded, breathless. "It wasn't just treasure," she said, pulling out the scroll. "It's a map to places no one's ever seen." Nana Lyra's eyes sparkled. "I knew you were the one, Mara. The compass has chosen you to continue the journey. But remember, this is only the beginning. There are many dangers ahead, and the world is full of secrets that some would rather keep hidden." As Nana Lyra unrolled the map and studied its markings, her face grew serious. "There are those who have searched for this map for centuries, Mara. Powerful people who would do anything to control the knowledge it contains. You must be careful who you trust on this journey." Mara's excitement wavered for a moment as the weight of her responsibilities settled on her shoulders. She had always dreamed of adventure, but she hadn't realized the danger that came with it. Still, she knew there was no turning back now. The compass had chosen her, and the journey was hers to complete. "But how will I know who to trust?" Mara asked, her voice quiet. Nana Lyra looked at her with a mixture of love and sadness. "You'll have to trust your heart, child. It will guide you as surely as the compass does. But never forget, knowledge is the real treasure, and it's more powerful than any gold or jewels." With the map in hand and the compass pointing to a new destination, Mara began to plan her next move. She knew she couldn't do this alone. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, and she would need allies, people she could trust to help her along the way. But who? As she sat in her small room, poring over the map, she remembered the stories her father used to tell her about the brave adventurers who sailed the seas in search of discovery. One name stood out in her mind, Captain Rylan, a fearless sailor who had traveled to the farthest reaches of the ocean. If anyone could help her navigate the unknown, it was him. Mara knew Captain Rylan sometimes docked at the nearby port town, so she decided that her first step would be to find him. With the compass pointing west, she gathered her belongings, packed the scroll carefully, and set off once again, this time toward the bustling town where her next adventure would begin. The port town was alive with activity when Mara arrived. Sailors shouted orders as they loaded and unloaded cargo from the ships docked in the harbor. The salty smell of the sea mixed with the scent of fresh fish and the smoky fires of the street vendors cooking their morning meals. Mara weaved through the crowded streets, her heart racing with anticipation. She asked around for Captain Rylan, but most people shook their heads. Some hadn't heard of him, and others said he hadn't been seen in months. Mara's excitement began to wane as she realized finding him might not be as easy as she had hoped. Just as she was about to give up, She overheard a conversation between two dock workers. They were talking about a ship that had arrived the night before, captained by none other than Rylan himself. Mara's heart leapt with excitement. She followed the dock workers, hoping they would lead her to the elusive captain. Mara finally found Captain Rylan sitting in a dimly lit tavern by the docks. He was older than she had imagined, with a grizzled beard and a face weathered by years of hard travel. His eyes were sharp, though, and there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself. Nervously, Mara approached him and introduced herself. She explained her quest, the compass, and the map she had discovered beneath the waves. Captain Rylan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, there was a long silence as he seemed to weigh her words. Finally, he spoke. "You're either very brave or very foolish, girl. What you're talking about is dangerous, more dangerous than you realize. But I've spent my whole life searching for something worth discovering, and it sounds like you've found it." Mara's heart soared. She had expected him to laugh her off, but instead, he seemed intrigued by the possibility of adventure. "If you're serious about this, I'll help you," Rylan said. "But know this. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." With Captain Rylan on her side, Mara felt more confident than ever. Together, they began preparing for the journey ahead. Rylan's ship, the Eagle's Wing, was well equipped for long voyages, and his crew was loyal and experienced. Mara could tell they trusted their captain implicitly, which gave her some comfort as she faced the unknown. As they set sail, Mara stood at the bow of the ship, the wind whipping through her hair. The compass in her hand glowed softly, its needle pointing steadily toward the distant island on the map. She had never felt more alive, and though the danger ahead weighed heavily on her mind, she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. The Eagle's Wing cut through the waves, leaving the safety of the port town behind. The sky was clear, and the sea was calm, but Mara knew that wouldn't last. There were whispers among the crew about the dangers of the uncharted waters they were heading into, and Captain Rylan had warned her that the journey would be treacherous. But Mara was determined. She had come too far to turn back now. As the days passed, the Eagle's Wings sailed farther from familiar waters. The crew grew tense as they entered the uncharted seas marked on Mara's map. These were waters no sailor had ventured into in centuries, and the air seemed to thicken with a sense of foreboding. Mara could feel it too, a strange energy that made her skin prickle. One night, as they sailed beneath a canopy of stars, Captain Rylan joined Mara at the bow. "This place that's not like anywhere I've ever sailed before," he said quietly. "There's something ancient here, something that's been hidden for a long time, and I think we're getting close to finding it." Mara nodded, her heart racing. She could feel the same pull, the same sense of something just beyond their reach. The compass was glowing more brightly now, its needle pointing straight ahead. Whatever lay beyond the horizon, it was waiting for them. On the morning of the 5th day, the ship was enveloped in a thick fog that seemed to rise out of nowhere. The crew whispered nervously among themselves, and even Captain Rylan seemed unsettled. The fog was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was dense, almost alive, swirling around the ship and blocking out the sun. Mara stood at the bow, clutching the compass tightly. She could feel the pull of the island growing stronger. "We're close," she whispered to herself, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of land. But there was nothing, just the eerie fog and the sound of the waves lapping against the hull. Then, out of the mist, a shape began to emerge. It was faint at first, just a shadow in the distance, but as they drew closer, Mara could make out the jagged peaks of an island rising from the sea. Her heart raced. This was it, the place the compass had led her to. The island was unlike anything Mara had ever seen. Its shores were rocky and treacherous, with sharp cliffs rising high above the crashing waves. The fog clung to the land like a shroud, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. But there was something else, a strange feeling that hung in the air, a sense that the island was watching them. Captain Rylan ordered the crew to drop anchor just offshore, and Mara, along with a small group, rowed to the island in a small boat. As they stepped onto the rocky beach, the air grew colder, and Mara felt a shiver run down her spine. The island was silent, as if it had been waiting for them. The compass glowed in her hand, its needle pointing toward the dense jungle that covered the island's interior. Mara knew they had to follow it, but the thought of venturing into the unknown filled her with both excitement and fear. The jungle was thick and overgrown, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and vegetation. Mara led the way, the compass guiding her through the twisting paths and underbrush. The farther they ventured, the darker it became, the canopy of trees blocking out the sunlight. Captain Rylan and the others followed close behind, their footsteps barely audible in the dense undergrowth. The island seemed deserted, but there was an unsettling feeling that they were not alone. Mara couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was watching them. After hours of trekking through the jungle, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone structure, ancient and covered in vines. It was a temple, unlike anything Mara had ever seen, and it radiated an aura of mystery and power. The compass's glow intensified as they approached, and Mara knew they had found what they were searching for. The entrance to the temple was guarded by two towering statues, their faces weathered by time, but still imposing. Mara hesitated for a moment, her heart racing with both excitement and trepidation. Captain Rylan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the ancient carvings that adorned the temple walls. "This place that's older than anything I've ever seen," he murmured. "We need to be careful." Mara nodded, clutching the compass tightly in her hand. She knew that whatever lay inside the temple was the key to unlocking the mysteries of the map, but she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. The temple had been built to protect something powerful. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the light from the outside world seemed to disappear. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of battles, gods, and forgotten civilizations. Mara's eyes were drawn to one particular carving, a figure holding a glowing orb, standing at the center of a swirling storm. The deeper they ventured into the temple, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the air grew thick with the weight of centuries of secrets. Mara could feel the pull of the compass growing stronger, urging her forward. Finally, they reached a massive stone door at the heart of the temple. It was covered in ancient symbols, some of which glowed faintly in the dim light. Mara felt a strange energy emanating from the door, as if it were alive, waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. Captain Rylan stepped forward, his hand hovering over the door. "This is it," he said quietly. "Whatever lies beyond this door, it's what we've been searching for." Mara took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding the compass up to the door. The symbols began to glow brighter, and with a low rumble, the door slowly began to open. Beyond the door was a vast chamber, filled with artifacts and treasures from a forgotten time. Golden statues, jeweled crowns, and ancient scrolls lined the walls, but at the center of the room stood a pedestal on which rested a glowing orb, the same orb Mara had seen in the carving. The orb pulsed with a strange energy, casting an eerie light across the chamber. Mara approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the power emanating from the orb, a power that seemed to call out to her. "This is it," Captain Rylan said in awe, his eyes fixed on the orb. "This is what we've been searching for." Mara reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the surface of the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, and the chamber around them began to tremble. As Mara touched the orb, a vision flashed before her eyes, a vision of the world as it once was, before the rise of civilizations and the fall of empires. She saw the ancient people who had built the temple, saw them harnessing the power of the orb to control the elements and shape the world around them. But with that power came destruction. The more they used the orb, the more it consumed them, until their once great civilization crumbled into dust. The orb had been hidden away, sealed within the temple, to prevent its power from ever being used again. Mara gasped, pulling her hand away from the orb. The vision faded, but the weight of what she had seen lingered. The orb was not just a treasure, it was a weapon that could change the world for better or for worse. Captain Rylan approached her, concern in his eyes. "What did you see?" Mara hesitated, her mind racing with the implications of the vision. "The orb, it's powerful, but it's dangerous. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Just as Mara spoke, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. They turned to see one of the crew members, a man named Garrett, standing at the entrance, his eyes filled with greed. "You don't understand, girl," he sneered. "That orb is worth more than you can imagine. With its power, we could rule the world." Mara's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Garrett had overheard their conversation and had been planning to steal the orb for himself. Captain Ryland stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "Garrett, don't do this. You don't know what you're messing with." But Garrett wasn't listening. He lunged toward the pedestal, reaching for the orb. In a split second, Mara acted. She grabbed the orb and held it close, its energy surging through her once again. The chamber trembled, and the walls began to crack as the power of the orb threatened to tear the temple apart. The temple shook violently as the power of the orb grew stronger. Mara could feel its energy coursing through her, threatening to overwhelm her. She knew she had to get out of the temple before it collapsed completely, but Garrett was still coming toward her, his eyes wild with greed. Captain Ryland drew his sword, blocking Garrett's path. "Get out of here, Mara," he shouted over the deafening roar of the crumbling temple. "Take the orb and go." Mara hesitated for a moment, but she knew there was no time to waste. She turned and ran, clutching the orb tightly as she made her way back through the temple. The walls were collapsing around her, and the ground shook beneath her feet. As she reached the entrance, she heard a loud crash behind her. She turned just in time to see the temple ceiling cave in, burying Captain Rylan and Garrett beneath the rubble. Mara stumbled out of the temple, gasping for breath. The jungle was eerily silent, as if the island itself was mourning the loss of the ancient temple. She looked back, her heart heavy with grief. Captain Rylan had sacrificed himself to protect her and the orb, and now she was alone. But there was no time to grieve. The island was still dangerous, and Mara knew she had to find a way off before it was too late. She made her way back to the shore, where the Eagle's Wing was anchored. The crew had already begun to prepare the ship for departure, unaware of what had happened in the temple. Mara boarded the ship, the orb still clutched tightly in her hands. She knew that her journey was far from over. The map had led her to the island, but there were still many secrets left to uncover. As the Eagle's Wing sailed away from the island, Mara sat alone in her cabin, staring at the orb. The vision she had seen in the temple played over and over in her mind. The ancient civilization had been destroyed by the power of the orb, and now it was in her hands. She knew she couldn't keep the orb for herself. It was too dangerous, too powerful. But she also knew that there were others who would stop at nothing to claim it. She had to find a way to protect it, to keep it hidden from those who would use it for evil. With a deep sigh, Mara unrolled the map once again. The compass glowed softly in her hand, its needle pointing to a new destination. There were still many places left to explore and many secrets left to uncover. As they sailed farther from the island, Mara began to notice strange ships on the horizon. At first, they seemed like distant specks, but over time, they grew closer. The crew grew uneasy, whispering about the possibility of pirates or worse. Mara knew they were being followed. Whoever was after the orb had found them, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. She had to stay one step ahead of them if she was going to protect the orb and the map. Captain Ryland's words echoed in her mind. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back. The pursuing ships grew closer with each passing day. Mara knew that a confrontation was inevitable. The crew prepared for battle, and Mara steeled herself for what was to come. She had come too far to let the orb fall into the wrong hands. As the enemy ships closed in, a fierce battle erupted on the open sea. Cannons roared, and swords clashed as the crew of the Eagle's Wing fought to defend their ship. Mara stood at the helm, the orb glowing brightly in her hands. She knew that the fate of the world rested on her shoulders. In the heat of battle, she made a decision. She couldn't keep the orb. It was too dangerous, and its power was too great. With a deep breath, Mara hurled the orb into the sea, watching as it sank beneath the waves. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you are enjoying the story.
The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The enemy ships retreated, and the crew of the Eagle's Wing cheered in victory. But Mara felt no joy. The orb was gone, its power lost to the depths of the ocean. But as the ship sailed toward the horizon, Mara felt a sense of peace. The journey had changed her, and though the orb was gone, the map and the compass still held many secrets. There were still new lands to explore, new mysteries to uncover. And so, with the wind at her back and the compass in her hand, Mara set off once again, ready for whatever adventure lay ahead. As Mara watched the orb sink into the ocean, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly gone. The sea, vast and mysterious, seemed to pulse with an energy that connected her to the ancient power of the orb. Though it was no longer in her hands, Mara suspected that the orb still had a role to play in the unfolding saga of the world. That night, as the crew celebrated their narrow victory, Mara stood on the deck, gazing out at the dark waters. The compass in her hand was quiet, its needle no longer glowing as it once had. She wondered if she had done the right thing by casting the orb away, but deep down, she knew she had no choice. Suddenly, the compass needle shifted ever so slightly, pointing downward. Mara's heart skipped a beat. The compass wasn't pointing toward a distant land this time. It was pointing to something below the surface of the sea. She felt a pull, a deep, instinctual urge to follow it. But how could she? The ocean held secrets far beyond her reach. That night, Mara was visited by a strange dream. She found herself floating deep beneath the ocean surface, surrounded by glowing, ethereal creatures. The water around her felt warm, comforting, and the distant hum of ancient voices echoed in her ears. In the dream, Mara saw the orb resting on the ocean floor, its light pulsing in rhythm with the waves. It was not lost, it was waiting for something or someone to claim it. As she reached out toward it, a voice, soft but clear, whispered in her mind, "The journey is not over. You have only delayed the inevitable." Mara awoke with a start, the remnants of the dream fading as dawn broke over the horizon. Her heart raced, and she glanced at the compass on her bedside table. Its needle now pointed directly downward, as if to confirm that what she had seen was real. There was no escaping it. The orb was calling her back, Determined to understand the meaning of her dream, Mara sought out the ship's navigator, an old man named Corwin, who had sailed across the world and had a reputation for knowing the mysteries of the sea. He listened carefully as Mara recounted her dream and showed him the compass's new direction. Corwin's face grew grim. There are tales of a place deep beneath the ocean, a forgotten city where the powers of old still linger. If your dream is true, then the orb has found its way to that place. Mara's pulse quickened. A city beneath the ocean? Corwin nodded. It is said to be the remnants of a lost civilization that once wielded great power over the elements. They built their city far below the waves to protect their secrets from the rest of the world. If the orb is there, it is no ordinary artifact. It is a key to unlocking something far greater. Mara was torn. She had already risked so much to retrieve the orb, and now she was being drawn into an even deeper mystery. But the pull of the compass was undeniable. She couldn't turn away from the adventure that lay ahead. Preparing for an underwater expedition was no easy task. Mara knew she needed special equipment to dive deep into the ocean and reach the submerged city. The crew of the Eagle's Wing was hesitant. Many feared the unknown depths, and rumors of sea monsters and cursed waters spread quickly among them. Captain Rylan had been a voice of reason and strength during the journey, but now that he was gone, the crew's resolve had weakened. Mara could sense their fear, but she also knew she had to press on. She made her way to the nearest port, a city known for its skilled divers and craftsmen. There, she met a woman named Isla, a seasoned diver who had explored some of the deepest parts of the ocean. Isla was intrigued by Mara's story and agreed to help, but not without a warning. Diving into those depths isn't just about surviving the pressure of the water, Isla explained as she prepared their equipment. It's about confronting the unknown. Whatever is down there, it's been waiting for a long time, and it won't let go of its secrets easily. Days later, with Isla and a small team of divers by her side, Mara found herself standing on the deck of the Eagle's Wing once more, staring down into the dark waters below. The crew had reluctantly agreed to stay anchored near the site of the orb's descent, though many had chosen to remain behind in port, unwilling to face what lay beneath the waves. The diving equipment was heavy, and the tension was thick as Mara, Isla, and the others prepared for the dive. Mara felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She was about to venture into the unknown once again, and this time, there would be no turning back. As they plunged into the depths, the world above disappeared, replaced by an eerie, otherworldly silence. The deeper they went, the darker the water became, until the sunlight was nothing more than a distant memory. Mara clutched the compass tightly in her hand, its needle still pointing downward, guiding them ever deeper. Hours passed as they descended deeper into the abyss. The ocean pressed down on them from all sides, and Mara could feel the weight of the water threatening to crush them. But the compass's glow was steady, leading them farther into the unknown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the ocean floor. The landscape was barren, covered in sand and scattered debris from ancient shipwrecks. But in the distance, Mara saw something that made her heart stop. A massive stone structure, partially buried beneath the sand. It was the temple from her dream. The ruins of the underwater city stretched out before them, ancient and awe-inspiring. As they swam closer, Mara felt the familiar pull of the orb, stronger now than ever before. It was close, very close. But the city wasn't empty.
As they explored the ruins, Mara and her team began to notice strange, shimmering shapes moving in the shadows. At first, They seemed like tricks of the light, but soon it became clear. They were not alone. The guardians of the city appeared, massive, ethereal beings that seemed to be made of water itself. Their glowing eyes watched the intruders with a quiet intensity, and Mara could sense their ancient power. They weren't hostile, but they weren't welcoming either. They were protectors, bound to the city and the secrets it held. Isla, who had been fearless throughout the dive, looked at Mara with wide eyes. "What are they?" Mara shook her head. "I don't know, but I think they've been here for a long time." The compass's glow intensified, leading them toward the center of the city. The guardians followed, always at the edge of their vision, watching their every move. At the heart of the submerged city, they found a massive chamber carved into the ocean floor. The entrance was adorned with intricate carvings of sea creatures and swirling currents, much like the carvings Mara had seen in the jungle temple. This chamber felt different, though. It was alive with a deep, pulsating energy. As they approached, the water itself seemed to vibrate with power, and Mara felt the orb's presence grow stronger. Inside, they found the source of the energy. Resting on an ancient pedestal at the center of the chamber was the orb, glowing more brightly than ever. It had settled into its final resting place, cradled by the ruins of the forgotten civilization that had once harnessed its power. But the chamber wasn't silent. A low hum resonated through the water, and Mara realized that it wasn't just the orb calling to her. There was something else. Something ancient. Something that had waited for countless centuries for the return of its greatest creation. Isla swam closer to the orb, her eyes wide with wonder. "We've found it," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the communication gear. "After all this time, we found it." But as they approached, the guardians that had followed them from the shadows emerged in full force, surrounding the chamber. Their glowing eyes flickered with warning. Mara knew that they were not meant to take the orb. It belonged here, deep in the ocean's depths, guarding the secrets of a world long forgotten. Mara stared at the orb, her mind racing. She had come so far, risked so much, to find it. And now, here it was, within reach, but protected by forces she didn't fully understand. She knew that taking the orb again would set something in motion, something that might be too dangerous to control. But could she leave it behind? The guardians moved closer, their presence growing more menacing. Isla glanced at Mara, her eyes questioning. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Mara took a deep breath, weighing her options. The orb's power had caused the destruction of entire civilizations before, and yet, the pull of it was undeniable. But there was something else, something the Guardians were trying to protect. The power wasn't meant for them. It wasn't meant for anyone. "We leave it," Mara said, her voice steady. "It belongs here." Isla looked at her in disbelief. "Are you sure? After everything?" Mara nodded. The power of the orb destroyed the people who created it. "If we take it, we'll meet the same fate. It has to stay here, where it can't harm anyone else." With heavy hearts, Mara and her team slowly backed away from the orb, leaving it in the chamber where it belonged. The Guardians, sensing their decision, relaxed their stance, their glowing eyes softening as they allowed the intruders to leave in peace. As they made their way back through the ruins, Mara couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The orb was no longer her burden to carry. It would remain in the depths, its power hidden from the world, guarded by the ancient forces that had protected it for so long. When they finally reached the surface, the sun was setting on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water. The crew of the Eagle's Wing welcomed them back with cheers, but Mara felt a quiet sense of finality. The journey that had begun with a mysterious map and a glowing compass had led her to the very edge of the world, and now it was over. But as she stood on the deck, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mara knew that her adventures were far from finished. The world was vast, filled with untold mysteries and hidden treasures. And though the orb was lost to the depths, the map and the compass still held many more secrets. With a quiet smile, Mara turned to face the crew. "Ready to ship," she said. "We're setting sail at first light." And as the eagle's wing cut through the waves, Mara felt a thrill of excitement. The sea stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibilities. Her journey was just beginning. As the eagle's wings set sail, Mara felt an unexpected sense of calm. The adventure of retrieving the orb had tested her courage, and though she had walked away from its power, she had learned invaluable lessons. For the first time in months, the sea seemed peaceful, and the crew moved with a quiet sense of relief, eager to leave the dangers of the past behind them. But deep inside, Mara knew that something was stirring. The compass, though silent now, still held the mysteries of the map. She had uncovered one great secret, but others remained, waiting to be found. The world was vast, and the shadows that had chased her before might not have been vanquished entirely. In the days that followed, Mara found herself drawn to the compass more often, its needle resting idle but still potent with potential. Her mind wandered to the places she hadn't yet explored, uncharted lands, lost islands, and hidden temples. What else had the map been leading her to? One night, as she lay in her cabin, listening to the gentle creak of the ship's wood and the lull of the waves, the compass began to glow once more. The soft glow from the compass was subtle at first, but soon it became brighter, illuminating the cabin with a faint, pulsating light. Mara sat up, her heart racing. The needle was no longer pointing downward, but instead had shifted west toward a new and unknown destination. It was as if the orb story was only a chapter in a greater saga. Mara knew that ignoring the compass wasn't an option. The pull she felt now was undeniable, more insistent than ever before. She rose from her bed, excitement and trepidation bubbling within her. By morning, Mara was ready to inform the crew of their new course. She gathered them on deck and told them of the compass's sudden change. Some were hesitant. Many had hoped the danger had passed, but Mara's confidence in the journey ahead inspired them. "We've faced greater challenges before," Mara said, standing tall. "This is what we do. We explore the unknown, and we uncover the truth. There's more to this story, and we're going to find it." The journey west took the crew into a part of the ocean few dared to explore. The skies remained clear, and the winds were in their favor, but there was an unspoken tension among the crew. Mara could sense it, a feeling that they were heading towards something big, something that could reshape their entire understanding of the world. Days passed in quiet anticipation. The compass's needle grew more erratic, pointing in different directions at times, as if they were nearing the edge of some invisible boundary. Mara pored over old maps, searching for any clue that could explain where they were headed. There were rumors of lost islands in this region, places untouched by modern hands, where ancient civilizations might have once thrived. One evening, as the ship sailed into uncharted waters, Mara spotted a distant landmass on the horizon. It was barely visible through the mist, but it was there, a solitary island, hidden away from the world. The crew gathered around her, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. "This is it," Mara whispered. "The compass has led us here." As they approached the island, an eerie fog rolled in, enveloping the ship in a blanket of mist. The island itself was shrouded in a mysterious haze, making it difficult to discern any clear details of its landscape. The crew murmured uneasily as the ship's bow cut through the thick fog, but Mara's heart raced with anticipation. This was what she had been searching for. The island's shore was rocky and unwelcoming, but Mara could see the remnants of an ancient structure peeking through the trees, a crumbling fortress or temple, perhaps long abandoned. The compass's needle pointed directly toward it, its glow growing stronger as they neared. Mara and a small group disembarked, ready to explore. As they made their way through the dense forest, strange sounds echoed around them, soft whispers carried on the wind, or perhaps the voices of long-forgotten spirits. Every step felt heavy, as though the island itself was watching them. The trees parted, revealing the ruins of a once great civilization. Massive stone pillars stood half-buried in the earth, and ancient symbols were carved into the walls. Whatever this place had been, it was old, older than any temple Mara had seen before. The fortress they had found was unlike anything Mara had ever seen. The architecture was distinctly different from that of the jungle temple or the underwater city, more rugged, as though it had been built for war rather than worship. The stone walls were weathered and cracked, but the structure had clearly withstood the test of time. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, Mara's group came across signs of a battle. Ancient weapons scattered across the ground, broken shields and helmets left to rust. Whoever had built this place had been prepared to defend it, but against what? At the heart of the fortress, they found a large chamber, its walls adorned with faded murals. The scenes depicted were violent. Armies clashing, mythical beasts rising from the earth, and a lone figure standing amidst the chaos, holding a glowing object that resembled the orb. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Could this be connected to the orb she had cast into the sea? Or was this something else, another artifact of immense power? Isla, who had accompanied Mara on this journey, touched the mural with reverence. Whatever happened here, it wasn't natural, she said quietly. These people were fighting for something they feared. In the heart of the fortress, they discovered more carvings, ones that depicted the original guardians of this place, warriors who had pledged to protect a powerful relic. It became clear that the orb was not the only artifact of power. This fortress had been built to house something just as dangerous, if not more so. Mara studied the carvings closely. The guardians were shown standing beside a great gate, sealing away something behind it. What lay beyond that gate? What had they been trying to contain? As they ventured further into the fortress, Mara's team found the gate itself, a massive, imposing structure made of a material unlike anything she had ever seen. It was covered in strange, glowing symbols, similar to those on the orb. The air around it felt charged with energy, and Mara could sense that whatever lay beyond it was still very much alive. Isla stepped forward, her hand hovering over the gate. "Do you think we should open it?" Mara hesitated. "Not yet. We need to understand what's behind it first." But the compass in her hand had other ideas. Its glow intensified, and the needle pointed directly at the gate, as if urging her to move forward. Mara stood before the gate, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She had come so far, uncovered so many secrets, but opening the gate could unleash something that had been sealed away for centuries. Yet, the compass seemed insistent. Whatever was beyond the gate was connected to the map, the orb, and the other artifacts she had encountered. The crew gathered around her, waiting for her decision. Isla looked at Mara with a mixture of fear and trust. "Whatever you decide, we're with you," she said softly. Mara took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the gate. She had always trusted the compass, and it had never led her astray. With a final glance at her companions, she pressed her hand against one of the glowing symbols. The gate rumbled, and slowly, it began to open. As the gate opened, a rush of wind swept through the fortress, carrying with it a strange, electric energy. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Behind the gate lay a vast chamber, its ceiling stretching high above them, disappearing into the darkness. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it rested an object, another orb, though different from the one Mara had found before. This one glowed with a deep, crimson light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Mara approached cautiously, the compass still guiding her forward. As she drew closer, she could feel the power emanating from the orb, stronger and more dangerous than anything she had encountered before. It was as if the orb was alive, watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. Isla stepped beside her. "This is what the fortress was protecting," she whispered. "But why?" Mara reached out, her hand trembling as it neared the orb. The moment her fingers brushed against its surface, a surge of energy shot through her, and the world around her shifted. Mara's vision blurred, and suddenly, she was no longer in the fortress. She found herself standing on a battlefield, surrounded by the same warriors she had seen in the murals. They fought fiercely, their weapons clashing as they tried to hold back a massive, shadowy figure that loomed over them. At the center of the chaos stood the lone figure from the murals, the guardian of the orb. He held the Crimson Orb aloft, its light cutting through the darkness. But the shadowy figure was relentless, pushing the warriors back, inch by inch. Mara watched in horror as the shadow reached for the guardian, its tendrils wrapping around him. The guardian screamed in agony, but he held fast, refusing to let go of the orb. In a final act of desperation, he thrust the orb into the shadow, and with a blinding flash of light, the battlefield was gone. Mara gasped, her vision clearing as she found herself back in the fortress. The orb pulsed in her hand, and she understood now. The shadow had been sealed away, but its power had never truly been destroyed. And now, with the gate open, it was beginning to awaken. Mara dropped the orb, her heart pounding. "We need to leave," she said, her voice urgent.
Now.
But it was too late. The ground shook violently, and the fortress walls began to crumble. A dark presence filled the air, and Mara knew that the shadow from her vision had been unleashed. The crew scrambled to escape, but the darkness was already spreading, seeping through the cracks in the stone. Mara's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to stop it. The orb, the Crimson Orb, was the key. It had been used once to seal the shadow away, and it could do so again. But could she control its power? With no other options, Mara grabbed the orb, feeling its energy surge through her once more. She turned to face the spreading darkness, her resolve firm. This was her fight now. The fate of the world rested in her hands. As the shadow closed in, Mara raised the orb high, and with a fierce cry, she unleashed its power. The orb's light exploded outward, clashing with the shadow in a violent burst of energy. The fortress walls disintegrated, and the sky above darkened as the two forces battled for dominance. Mara stood at the center of it all, her body humming with the power of the orb. The shadow recoiled, but it was relentless, pushing back against the light with all its might. Mara could feel the strain of the battle, the weight of the power threatening to overwhelm her. But she couldn't give up, not now. Not when so much was at stake. With a final surge of strength, Mara channeled every ounce of energy she had into the orb. The light grew brighter, blindingly so, and the shadow let out a deafening roar as it was consumed by the light. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the battle was over. When the light faded, Mara collapsed to the ground, her body spent. The fortress was in ruins, and the island itself seemed to have been torn apart by the battle. But the shadow was gone. The darkness that had threatened to consume the world had been vanquished. The crew rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. Isla looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved us." Mara nodded weakly, still clutching the Crimson Orb. Its light had dimmed, but it was still warm to the touch, a reminder of the power it held. She knew that the danger wasn't truly gone, not entirely, but for now, the world was safe. As they made their way back to the ship, Mara looked down at the horizon.
Of the fight,
Stretched out before them,
in the dark of the night,
but the compass
heroes stand brave and tall
its needle
against
pointed toward another
shadows
distant
they
land.
call.
Her journey was
Light bursts through the gloom, chasing darkness to its doom. Echoes ring in the sky,